Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Dedicated Hearts made Fullmetal in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 1, An Impossible Offer. Edward and Alphonse both entered the house. "Hey Winry, I'm done with the roof," yelled Ed as he shut the door behind him. They both sat down on the couch with 2 mugs of hot tea resting on the table in front of them. Alphonse picked up the mug before him and took a sip. Winry peered at them through the doorway to the hallway, wearing an apron stained in flour. "Took you long enough, Ed," remarked Winry as she leaned up against the door frame with her arms folded. "Hey, I'm still getting used to all this." "Okay," countered Ed, annoyed. Both Alphonse and Winry lightly giggled at Ed. "It's not funny, Winry. Do you know how painful it is repairing this house?" he said, irritated. "Well Ed, this may surprise you, but I do. Not all us were alchemy freaks," she replied matter-of-factly with a mischievous smile on her face. Edward growled in response to Winry's comment. The last 2 years required him to make an adjustment to how he did things. The difficulty of what seemed like simple tasks in the past had escalated greatly. It didn't help that ever since they returned home Winry has had them do work around the house for her and Grandma Rockwell. "Oh come on Winry, leave Ed be, he has been working hard after all," laughed Alphonse, sitting next to Ed and holding the mug of tea in his hands. Ed watched as the two of them giggled at his annoyance for having to do different odd jobs for Winry. He thought back to when he traded in his alchemy for his brother. He allowed his lips to form into a small smile at their apparent happiness and the normality of their lives. It was worth it, he thought to himself. Alphonse leaned over to Ed. "So when are you going to ask her?" he whispered with a sly smile on his face. Ed rolled his eyes. "You don't need to worry about that," he replied. "I'll do it when the time is right, or when I have the guts to ask. By the way Ed, this came in the mail for you. It was sent by Roy." She walked over to the counter and tossed him his old pocket watch. He stretched his hand upwards and caught the silver watch, and stared at it for a second. He had sent it away with a letter asking to be revoked of his government license maybe over a week ago. It puzzled him as to why Roy would send it back. Whenever a state alchemist either resigns or has their license revoked, they also have to give up the pocket watch, which was their form of identification. "Why would he send this back?" asked Ed. His eyes narrowed as he stared at the silver pocket watch in his hands. "Beats me, but you should have it as a keepsake," replied Winry, smiling. Ed looked down at the silver pocket watch again, his mind solely on the engraved marking he scratched on in the lid. He knew that Winry also knew about this and wondered why she wanted he to keep it. He mentally shrugged off the thought, placed the watch in his right pocket and hooked the chain onto his belt loop. He'd place it in the drawer when he had the time. There was a muffled ding sound in another room which caught Winry's attention. "The apple pie must be ready," said Winry. She walked back over to the entrance to the hallway. "Oh, and by the way she abruptly stopped her sentence as she turned to face Ed and Al again. Her eyes widened and she had a horrified look on her face. She wanted to say something, she wanted to scream, to yell, do anything to warn them, but that thing on the wall behind them, the mere sight of it paralyzed her with fear. "What is it?" asked Alphonse, both of them looking at Winry's expression confused. That when Ed noticed it, black tendrils. Familiar black tendrils latched onto his body. Ed panicked. He grabbed hold of one and quickly tried to rip it off his body, but their grip on him quickly tightened and suddenly they pulled him into something from behind him. The last thing he heard was the mug of tea Alphonse was holding shatter on the ground, and the last thing he saw was Winry rushing towards them and trying to reach out for them. Edward rubbed his head, trying to soothe the splitting headache he was suffering from. What happened? He slowly opened his eyes and was greeted to a familiar blinding white light of a brightly lit room. The realization of where he was hit him like an oncoming train. He rushed to his feet and almost instantaneously his eyes fell upon a familiar figure who sat before him. "What the hell?" yelled Edward, his anger directed at the truth. It had been 2 years since he's seen the truth, 2 years since he gave up his ability to do alchemy in return for Alphonse's body. He'd believed that was the last time, and now he found himself back into the truth's domain. Softly whined a voice to his right. Edward turned his head to see Alphonse lying on his back. "Al!" yelled Edward as he ran towards him. "Brother!" replied Alphonse, who embraced his Edward. Ed fell to his knees, hugged him back. "What happened?" asked Edward. "Are you all right? Did you lose anything?" "I don't know," replied Alphonse. Quickly he got up to his knees and then began to frantically look and tap around his body. checking if everything was there. One moment I was with you and Winry at home and the next thing I know I'm here. He finished. Al turned his head towards the Truth who sat opposite to them. Before Al could open his mouth to question the Truth, he noticed something off-putting. The Truth didn't have its usually toothy grin on its plain white face, instead his face held a more neutral expression. Seeing this unnerved Alphonse, it looked almost unnatural. Alphonse slowly got up to his feet. The brothers then turned their full attention towards the Truth. Why are we here? Why have you brought us here again? Questioned Alphonse. We haven't done anything wrong. You better have a damn good reason for kidnapping us, yelled Edward as he pointed his finger at the Truth accusingly. The Truth then stood up. Despite the lack of a smile on its face, its demeanor was still relaxed. I have an offer for you boys, declared the Truth. On another world there are a group of people who are fighting a war for their survival. I've watched as they've courageously struggle against a powerful force they do not yet fully understand but who seek to annihilate them. The Truth paused to allow the information to sink in, before then continuing, this is where you boys come in. You've faced adversaries of immense power and still overcame them. The Truth face then contorted into a very small smile, still not showing any teeth. No doubt with you two entering the situation this should tip the scales in their favor. Edward and Alphonse stood and stared at the Truth almost dumbfounded by what it was telling them. So you're telling me, that you kidnapped us from our home to have us thrown into another world's fight? Questioned Ed. I won't force you boys to go, it's merely part of the offer, what you'll have to do in return, replied the Truth. You're asking us to fight in someone else's war, don't know what you could offer to make us consider that, have you forgotten the law of equivalent exchange? Taunted Ed, a sly grin on his face. Also I'm not the military dog I was 2 years ago, only Al can still use alchemy and the situation you described sounds like a job for the military than just one alchemist prodigy. The Truth smiled, its face now wearing that toothy grin that the brothers knew and feared. It then raised its left hand, holding it close to its face. How about 2 prodigies of alchemy then? Responded the Truth as he clicked his fingers. There was a loud crackling sound of lighting and large bright blue sparks formed behind them. Both Edward and Alphonse turned behind them and watched in absolute shock as Edward's door of truth began to materialize in front of them. The door that Edward traded away for Alphonse 2 years ago had returned to him, just like that. We'll go on, the Truth said, his arms outstretched toward Edward. Try it out, let's see if you've gotten rusty after these last 2 years. Suddenly a small block of wood appeared in front of the boys. Edward slowly pressed his hands together and a familiar blue spark appeared between his palms. A burst of adrenaline coursed through his veins as he knelt down and picked up the small wooden block. He then transmuted the block into a small wooden bird, the same one that he and Alphonse transmuted years ago when they first tried to learn about alchemy. The Truth then pointed towards Edward's door of truth. If you boys accept the offer, then Edward can not only have his ability to perform alchemy for the job but he can keep it afterwards. The Truth paused to allow the offer to sink in. So what do you boys say? Asked the Truth. Alphonse continued his stare down with the Truth. The chance to get Edward's alchemy back, his chance to repay his brother on the promise Edward made to him to get his body back. But despite this they knew they couldn't accept the offer. They couldn't be caught up in another world's conflict when they had only recently finished theirs and were still continuing to rebuild their lives since the aftermath. Now was certainly not the time to go and get involved in events they had no knowledge of. We have only recently gotten our lives back and we have people waiting for us, said Al. We can't just drop everything and risk our lives in a fight we know nothing about. We could be there for months, even years away from the people we need to spend time with, the people who need us most. Time operates differently between worlds. A month on this world is worth a year in the other, replied the Truth. Should you spend some years there, perhaps maybe even a decade, in that world you will age with time. However, when you'll return to your world, you'll return in the same physical state you left. Any scars or aging you went through in that world won't appear when you return to yours. How quickly you'll return to your world depends on how fast you boys operate, but once you're back it will be as if you never left at all. Though what you bring from that world, you can bring into yours. How do we get back home exactly, if we succeed or fail? Asked Edward. You can return at any point. Success or failure is how you measure, boys, if you truly believe that you have prevented the annihilation of those people, or if you believe that the situation is hopeless, then draw this transmutation circle and a portal back will open," replied the truth. A transmutation circle then appeared in the space between the brothers and the truth before them. It was very similar to a transmutation circle which they were familiar with using, but it had difference in details. Though be warned, you only get one chance to head home, so choose your moment wisely and don't waste it, or you could find yourself trapped in that world. "Wait!" yelled Edward, "you're willing to give me back my ability to perform alchemy should we accept, and gives us an opt-out which we can use at any point." He looked at the truth with a dumbfounded expression. "How do you know we won't just summon the portal the moment we get there and just head back home with my alchemy returned? I know you boys like I know everyone and everything. While you have your own goals, dreams, and ambitions, you don't have the ruthlessness to do such a thing. You despise injustice and the suffering of others, am I right?" The truth retorted, "Remember when you had the chance to shoot envy but couldn't, when you saw the faces of those Xerxesian trapped within him, begging for help?" It said, its non-existent eyes staring down Edward. "When you arrived and witnessed the carnage and suffering of those people, can you really look yourself in the eyes knowing that you have the power but was too apathetic to do anything?" It then turned its head towards Alphonse. "And what about you, Alphonse? When you protected Riza Hawkeye from lust, what was it you said?" "I won't let anyone get killed, not while I can protect them." "Tell me, Alphonse, could you stomach abandoning those in need?" The brothers glanced at each other. They knew that the truth was trying to appeal to their sense of heroism. They even considered the time gap. It meant they could spend as long as necessary to aid those struggling in their war and wouldn't be gone for that long. It could be months, but they're spent longer away from home back in the days when they were trying to recover their bodies, and they wouldn't be trapped in that world. They could leave as soon as they felt their job was done, and in the end Edward could get his alchemy back. But still, they had to decline. They didn't want to possibly spend years in that world and months away from those they love, and they had left Winry so abruptly. "Sorry, but you're gonna have to find someone else. Those days of getting into fights are over for us," announced Ed. He thought that this complete rejection would have sent a clear message to the truth. "Thanks, but no deal." Al placed his hand on Edward's shoulders, as a sign of solidarity with Edward's declaration. "If it's all the same to you, we're heading out," said Al, with a defiant smirk in his face. Replied the truth questioningly, that toothy grin still plastered on his face. "Well, if you boys insist, then you are free to go." The door of truth behind them began to slowly open, and the brothers were bathed in a familiar blinding light. "Winry must be worried about us," said Alphonse to Edward, with a small smirk on his face. "But before you boys go, I'd like to add something to the offer. Hopefully it will change your minds," said the truth, the grin on his widening. "Accept the offer, and I'm willing to not only return Edward's alchemy back, but I'm willing to give you one demand." The brothers turned their heads to face the truth. "Demand?" questioned Edward. "What kind of demand?" "The kind that allows many exceptions to certain rules of the universe," said the truth. "The kind which allows a person to have whatever they want, whatever their hearts desires. The kind that can see a long list of people brought back to life in perfect health, with no strings attached." It was that last statement. Their eyes widened at what was being said. A cold chill ran down their backs at the thought of it. "You're lying!" Edward yelled. "It's impossible to bring the dead back to life." Edward gave the truth a look of absolute fury. If these last years had taught him anything, it's that you can't bring back the dead, and that it was better to move from loss than be tied down and obsessed at reversing what is permanent. Now the truth was telling him that the lesson he had learned was a lie. It was possible after all. "I am the truth, Edward," it responded. Just that simple statement was enough to turn Edward's expression from one of anger to horrified realization. He hadn't felt this way since Hohenheim had him question why he burnt down the house. Consider this equivalent exchange. Save a group of people from total destruction, they go on to live for generations, and in return you get to bring back a whole list of people from the dead, if you desire, of course. In their minds they went through that list of names: Tricia Elric, Van Hohenheim, Moss Hughes, Nina, and Alexander, Fu, Captain Buccaneer, Yuri Rockwell, Sarah Rockwell, Scar's family, Izumi and Sig Curtis' son, Rose's fiancé. The list went on. "Of course the parameters of the deal change. I'll be the judge of your progress, and if I deem that you two have done your job, then I will grant it to you. That being said, you must secure a future in which these people can live for generations in relative peace, come back making little progress in the way of that, or come back as failures, then I will only return Edward's alchemy and nothing more. Finished the truth. The door of truth began to slowly close on them. It was now or never. They could leave through the portal, return home, live their lives and leave those people to their fate, or they could go to this other world, be away from home for maybe a few months, but gain back Edward's alchemy and a chance to give their loved ones, and all those who sacrificed themselves for the brothers, a second chance at life. Wait, pleaded Alphonse, can't we think about this? Maybe go back and prepare first. In his mind an internal battle was waged, a desire to go home and finally live a normal life against the want of seeing and paying back everyone by bringing back their lost loved ones. He turned his head towards an ever-closing door of truth behind them, and then the truth. No, responded the truth, still looking at them with that dim grin. It's now or never. They both turned to face the door, looking at it with scared hesitation before turning to face the truth again. The blinding light was now just centimeters from closing completely. We would only be away from home for a few months, but surely they'll understand. They two of them tried to reason, when they get everyone back, it'll be for the greater good. What's a few years in that world and a few months away from home compared to bring back of all the people they'd lost over the last few years? They just couldn't compare. Winry would understand why, of course she would. Won't she? They'll all understand why they were gone for maybe a few months. Won't they? Both Edward and Alphonse watched as the once blinding white light became thin sliver between two towering dark stone slab doors. The door of truth slowly closed shut before them. They had made their choice. Chapter 2, First Encounter. Edward slowly opened his eyes, awakening in a thin alleyway between two houses that appear to have been built with stone and wood. You all right, Al? Asked Edward, rubbing his eyes. Yeah, at least we didn't get a headache this time, said Al as he stood up from the ground and dusted himself off. They cautiously walked towards the end of the alleyway, following the path into a cobblestone street. As they stepped out onto the street, the first thing that struck them was how empty the place was. The street was vacant of people, but all around they could hear the sound of distant yelling, and above the row of houses Ed could make out what looked to be a tall wall in the distance. Where is everyone? Edward wondered to himself. He walked a few steps along the street as he observed his surroundings while Alphonse peered into the windows of empty buildings that lined the cobblestone road. Ed knocked on one of the doors. Hello, anyone home? Suddenly a loud bang above them caught their attention. They quickly looked up to see a small group of people carrying what looked to be large swords landing on the roof of one of the houses before they began to sprint across the rooftops. Edward and Alphonse watched as they fired grappling hooks from large metal containers which looked to be wrapped around their waists onto the nearby houses as a sudden force flung them through the air at an incredible speed. Whoa, said Alphonse as he watched wide-eyed, amazed by what he saw. Come on, we gotta try and follow them, yelled Edward. Ed and Alphonse began to run towards the general direction of the gliding people. But as quickly as they came, they quickly vanished from their sight. It was only a matter of seconds before they lost track of them, but despite this they still continued to run through the empty street trying to find someone, anyone, around who they could talk to. They ran further south into the city, and quickly the yelling they heard when they first arrived began to get louder, only this time it was mixed in with gut-wrenching screams of pain and desperate pleas for help. They're everywhere, came one voice. They're closing in, came another voice. Oh God, help me, came a third. The rest was incomprehensible yelling and screaming. What the hell is going on? Ed thought as they looked around and still were unable to find anyone else. They were halfway through running along a small street lined with houses on both sides, which was connected to a wider road, when suddenly a loud crash stopped them in their tracks. It sounded as if a train carriage had been thrown and collided into a building. Was that an explosion? Asked Alphonse. They sprinted towards the end of the street to investigate it. They had only just peered from the corner of the street when they caught sight of it. It was a large naked humanoid with light blonde hair. It looked to be maybe over 10 meters tall, and it clung to what looked to be a church watchtower. Their eyes widened in absolute shock at what they saw. They took a step back at the sight of the monster in front of them. They watched as the humanoid creature tilted its head upwards as if to swallow something. It then proceeded to climb down from the tower and walk down the road toward them. Get back, Al, whispered Edward. They quickly moved from the road out of sight, back into the small street, and quickly placed their backs against the wall of the building at the corner of the road, hoping not to be caught by the large creature. Edward and Alphonse watched the giant creature with a mixture of awe and terror as it passed them. It didn't walk like a regular person even though it walked on two legs. It appeared to be sluggish in its movements and lumbered forwards in the direction of the road, and its face looked both human and inhuman, all the feature but not in proportion to what a normal face should look like. Ed and Al slowly pressed their hands together, ready to perform alchemy to kill it should the hideous monster spot them. A bead of sweat ran down their foreheads as their bodies tensed up in anticipation of being caught. The giant humanoid continued to lumber its way past the small street, not spotting the brothers. As the giant passed them, Alphonse kept watch of it. It was no further than maybe 6 blocks away from them. Edward peered his head over the street corner into the road, viewing the direction which the giant came from, that when he saw them, the people with the waist grappling hook devices, 2 for them looked to be ahead of the others, but one of them was soaring in front of the other at an incredible speed. Ed watched as the leading person flew through the air, passing the street they were hiding in, passing under the bridge connecting 2 buildings, and looked to be heading straight for that giant monster. That's when he caught a clear sight of those 2 large blades which was attached to some wire. This was followed by the next person, who stuck to the rooftops, not copying the same maneuvers as the person leading the charge. Are they going to attack that thing with just those blades? Ed thought curiously. Al turned his head from the large monster towards the group of people gliding through the air. They both stepped out into the road to watch in anticipation as one of them looked to strike the giant from behind. They watched in nervous awe as this person twirled through the air, the sun gleaming off his large blades. They watched in shock as another one of those large monsters leap into the air and bit into that person leading the charge, and they watched in wide-eyed horror as the person skid across the rooftops, no doubt sliding across the tile roofs as bit of broken tiles fell to the ground. Aaron! Came a yell from in front of them. They looked up to the rooftops on the buildings straight ahead and saw one of them, those people gliding through the air. They could make out the individual's blonde hair and the large blades he was carrying, like the person who just got a chunk of him bitten off. They seemed to be soldiers of some kind from the uniform they were wearing. "We gotta help Dash," said Ed urgently, but a loud thud from behind them interrupted his sentence. They quickly looked back to see 2 others caught in the grips of the giants, and then another one person being slammed into a pillar as a giant peered around the corner at the now unconscious person. Before Edward and Alphonse could act to save them, they quickly caught sight of more and more of those giant humanoids appearing from the different streets connecting to the road. They turned to face the road they came from to find another one, this time a smaller giant walking down the same street. They came to a horrifying realization. They were surrounded. Alphonse and Edward pressed their backs against each other as they quickly tried to think of a strategy to quickly save those caught by the giants and escape. "Al!" yelled Ed, "I'll block off the road and street corners in my direction to hold them off. You get to those guys and bring here, we'll escape together." "What about the guy on the rooftops? He could still be alive, we have help him too," responded Al. "We'll just have to hope his buddy over there gets to him. Right now those guys won't make it without our help," retorted Ed. Alphonse ran in the direction of the downed and caught soldiers in a desperate attempt to try and save their lives, while Edward quickly placed his hands together and slammed them on the ground, transmuting a 20-meter stone wall which blocked off the main road and the smaller streets' connection and separating themselves from the advancing giants on the main road. However, the giant monsters weren't about to give up as one of them slammed their body against it and broke a large 8-meter hole through center of the wall with ease. The large monster observed Edward through the hole with his hideously large eyes and toothy grin. Thinking fast, Ed slammed his hand on the ground again, this time transmuting a large stone crossbow from the ground, firing a sharp projectile and striking the giant humanoid through the eye. The giant tumbled to the ground. "How'd like Dash?" Before he could finish his last word, the giant humanoid slowly began to get up from the ground and pull the arrow from its head. Steam appeared to be emanating from the area of injury as it grew back the flesh and skin it had lost. How the hell is it?" Ed muttered to himself, shocked that he didn't kill the giant. He instinctively took a step back and watched in both shock and curious awe as the monster began to resume its attack and observe Ed with that ugly, undamaged eye. Alphonse sprinted towards the unconscious soldier, who was now within the grasp of the giant that had been observing them in the alleyway with its large and hungry eyes. The giant began to open its wide mouth and place the head of the captured soldier into its cavity, ready to bite down on the soldier's head and fill their large stomach. "No!" yelled Alphonse. He clapped his hands together and placed his left hand on the ground while he continued to run. The tips of his fingers skidded across the ground as he transmuted a long spear, Once it was completed, he raised the spear with both hands and charged full speed forward, aiming the sharp tip at the giant humanoid's head. Alphonse pierced the peering giant's temple with the long spear. He then quickly let go of the spear as the giant urgently got up to its feet in a state of shock, dropping the soldier on the ground and flailed about. Alphonse then quickly slammed his hands on the ground, transmuting a stone spike from the floor which impaled the giant through its body, causing the large monster to fall limp as it dangled from the spike. Al quickly checked on the now saved person. It was a girl who must be maybe about his age or younger. She had black hair which was done up in 2 pigtails and was wearing what looked to be a small brown coat with an insignia of 2 swords on it and a small sash with white pants, knee-high leather boots and rows of belts strapped to her body. "Hey. Are you alright? What's your name?" asked Al. He reached out his hand and pulled her up to a standing position. She placed her hand on the pillar for balance as her legs wobbled slightly. She was shorter than him and maybe only slightly shorter than Winry and had a slender build. Mina, responded the girl weakly. But before Alphonse could respond, he was quickly alerted to the giant biting down on the other guy's legs, trying to push him into its mouth as the guy struggled to keep everything above his waist outside of the giant's gnawing teeth. "Someone please. Help me." The soldier screamed, "I don't wanna die." Alphonse quickly slammed his hands against the wall, transmuting a white stone pillar on the top half of the building. It struck the chest of the giant with such force that the monster lost balance and crashed into the building on the other side. It spat out the soldier from its mouth and sent the poor man falling onto the ground from a painful distance. Then, slamming both hands on the ground, Alphonse transmuted a large hand. It shot upwards from the ground, then made a curve down to hold the fallen giant in its place, the large stone hand holding the giant's large stomach as it struggled to get back up. Alphonse ran to the soldier who was currently lying on his back. It was a man. He looked to be his age, had straw-colored hair and was wearing the same uniform with the same insignia as Mina. They must be part of this place's military, thought Al. "Hey. Are you alright? What's your name?" asked Al. He then looked down to see the mess of blood and mangled broken legs. "My legs, help me please," he pleaded to Al, grabbing at Alphonse's trouser leg. "I will," responded Al, kneeling down to face him. "I just have to get dash." Before Al could respond, the sound of a sickening crunch caught his attention. He turned his head to watch the third soldier crushed within the giant's grasp be devoured from his waist as his blood and guts spill out onto the giant's face and the ground below. Al quickly turned away from the horrible sight and looked towards Mina, who was standing up straight, her hand still on the pillar, staring at Al with stunned wide eyes and mouth slightly agape at what she just witnessed. "How did you dash?" She was cut off by Al, who asked her. "Can you run?" he asked, a grave sense of urgency in his voice. She paused for a few seconds, then replied, "Yes." "Good, we've gonna have to drag him if we're to get out of here," he said, moving to the injured soldier's left side Al position. He placed his arm underneath the soldier's. Mina quickly picked up the handles to her gear and shoved them into the metal containers. She then ran towards Milius' right side and placed her arm under his. While she positioned her arm, she never took her eyes off Alphonse. She had just watched in awe as this guy somehow made spikes, pillars and hands made out of stones, in seconds, to take out titans and all by touching the ground and the wall. "All right, let's move," commanded Al. With that, they began to move as fast as they could while dragging the injured soldier, who was still crying in pain. His crushed legs left a streak of blood on the road following them. "Hey. You hear me? It's gonna be fine," said Al to the wounded soldier. "What's your name?" M. Milius, responded the wounded soldier weakly. "I'm Alphonse Elric," Al replied. "We're getting out of here. We just got to get to my brother ahead of us." The giant humanoids resumed breaking down the stone wall and soon others began to help. Ed quickly snapped out of his shock. "I don't think so," he said, determination dripping from his voice as he clapped his hands together and slammed them on the ground, transmuting the same 20-meter wall in front of them, this time making it 5 meters. "This should hold them off for now," said Ed, a triumphant smirk on his face, and then a small crack appeared on the wall. They were still breaking through. "Hurry up, Al," thought Ed. "Brother!" yelled Alphonse. Ed turned to see his brother and one of those soldiers dragging their wounded comrade towards him. As soon as he turned his head to face Al, a large crash occurred behind him. They had broken a small hole in the wall. Ed saw the giant place its head to watch him through the gap in the wall. "Brother, we've here," yelled Al. Mina observed the wall and that was blocking the road. She turned her head to see similar wall erected in different streets, no doubt holding back the Titans on those streets. Those weren't there before. Mina thought to herself, how the hell did they do that? She then looked behind them. She watched in horror as the peering Titan, which was incapacitated, was now on the move towards them along with the other Titans. Titans! She yelled, heading straight for us. Ed and Alphonse turned to face the direction of road which Al and the soldiers had retreated from. Wah! But I impaled her, muttered Al. He watched as the peering Titan headed straight for them, its large unblinking eyes fixated on the group. Mina quickly took the handles to her ODM gear, aimed it at the rooftops and pulled the trigger, but the equipment must have taken damage as the grappling hook didn't fire. My ODM gear. It won't work, Mina panicked as she frantically pulled the trigger. I can't get us out of here. Don't worry, replied Edward, everyone just hang on. Okay. Alphonse grabbed onto the back of Edward's shirt and Mina's forearm. Mina clutched Alphonse's forearm back and with her free hand she grabbed Milius by the collar. Edward quickly clapped his hands. Mina could have swore she saw small bolts of lightning forming between his hands. He then slammed them onto the ground. A large pillar jutted for the ground underneath them at a slanted angle towards the rooftops. Just as they left the ground, the wall that was holding back the Titans had collapsed from the relentless assault by the Titans on the other side of it. The abrupt stop of the fast-growing pillar sent the group flying and landing roughly on the rooftop's tiles. "Man," yelled Ed, getting himself up, "we have to go further in so they can't reach us." The three of them proceeded to pick up Milius and carry him further inwards, away from the grasp of the Titans. He was now unconscious and his skin had become pale. He had lost too much blood. They had to treat his wounds quickly or else he would die from blood loss. Mina turned her head back and looked towards the ground, and she saw the peering Titan, the one which could have eaten her just a minute ago, stare back at her with its large unblinking eyes. "Put him here," said Alphonse as he slowly lowered Milius' head to the roof. He was now deathly pale from the loss of blood. As they lay his body down, a small puddle of blood from underneath his destroyed legs. "Take his boots off," Alphonse asked. He wanted to inspect the damage done to his legs. Mina and Edward both grabbed hold of one boot each and pulled it off his legs. They were mortified to discover that when they removed them a small pool of blood had formed in them, spilling onto the ground as they took them off. The Titan had chewed on his legs while trying to push him into its mouth. The three of them looked in horror at the mess of blood and broken legs before them. His long white trousers were now soaked red in his blood. "Oh God!" Milius said. Mina, her hand was over her mouth and her eyes were on the verge of tears as the realization dawned on her that another one of her comrades, another member of the 104th Trainee Corps, was killed. "I can stop the bleeding," said Alphonse. He then placed his hand in the pool of blood and began using it to draw a transmutation circle from alchemy. He desperately tried to recall one of the lessons on medical alchemy that Mai taught him back in the north and whatever he had researched in order to save this poor soldier's life. He then placed his hands on the ground. A bright light then appeared over the blood marking. Mina watched with tears rolling down her cheek for her dying comrade, but yet she was still in awe by what she was witnessing. Edward quickly knelt beside his head and placed 2 fingers on the pulse in his neck. "Brother, Is he alive?" stuttered Alphonse. Edward waited for a few seconds, his fingers on the pulse trying to detect a sign of life, but there was nothing. Ed's body then slumped slightly, his hands fell to his sides and he lowered his head. "He's gone, I'm so sorry." Alphonse, who had been kneeling during the process, shifted into a sitting position, his head lowered similar to Edward. "I'm sorry, Mina," Al in a hushed tone, "I'm so sorry." Mina's own body slumped, her head lowered into her knees and she began to sob heavily over the loss of another one of her squad members. The people she had trained with, struggled with, and grew up with had just been slaughtered in a single day. Thomas, Nick, Milius. Overhead, dark clouds engulfed the bright sun and turned the once bright blue sky into a depressing sea of gray as a gentle shower of rain began to pour over them. Chapter 3, Who Are We? Edward studied the city, standing on the top end of the slanted rooftop. It looked as though the whole city was encased in a tall circular-shaped wall. It reminded him of the Wall of Briggs in the north, except on an impossibly larger scale. He observed the structure and design of the buildings, trying to figure out what time period this world was in. The stone and dirt roads and these houses look almost medieval or maybe even a later period. No vehicles, just wooden carts so far, no streets lights or lamps or any sign of electrical wires or gas piping anywhere in the air. Edward then inhaled deeply through his nose and exhaled through his mouth. It's similar back in Resemble where there's hardly any industrial factories or vehicles passing by, but Resemble is in the countryside and this place looks to be as densely packed as a city. He then looked back at Mina, who was sitting against one of the windows jutting out of the roof. Her crying lessened after a while, but she still had a trail of tears flowing from her eyes which she tried to rub away. He began to study what he heard her call the ODM gear, which they must use to get close to those titans as she called them. Weird. They seem to be behind in technological advancements on all fields when compared to ours, but yet these people were able to develop some kind of grappling hook device, and it must be powered by something that allows them to move at incredible speeds. Alphonse knelt down on both knees in front of Mina. Maybe close to an hour ago he was at home smiling and enjoying the time he spent with his brother and close childhood friend Winry. Now he was on a rooftop surrounded by giant man-eating monsters and has to comfort a young soldier over the death of one of her comrades, all the while feeling responsible for his death. His thoughts were consumed with what he could have done better. He thought about what to say to her and what excuse he would use to justify his failings. If I had only reacted faster, if I had only taken out those giants sooner, if I had only just remembered those alchemy lesson, I could have saved him. I'm sorry, Mina, Al said softly, his voice aching with sorrow. Mina looked up to face him, her silvery gray eyes staring into his eyes, which a slightly darker shade of gold than his hair. If I had just been faster, he clenched his fist in frustration as he looked away from her gaze. He didn't want to see those eyes look at him accusingly. If I had just remembered, I could have dash. His apology was cut short when Mina suddenly threw her arms around him and hugged him tightly. Alphonse was dumbstruck and didn't know what to think. Thank you. If you hadn't shown up, I'd be dead, she replied, her voice cracking slightly. Al was taken aback by her reaction, but he unclenched his fist and gently placed one hand on her back to reciprocate the hug. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Alphonse muttered, still wanting to apologize. Hey, said Ed, watching the moment unfold while he walked back to them. The two of them separated from each other and Ed knelt beside Al to face Mina. I'm sorry about your friend. He paused for a few seconds. Are you all right to talk now? He said, trying to match the softness of Al's voice. Yeah, Mina replied as she rubbed her eyes lightly. All right, first things first, were there anyone else with you? Ed asked. So far there were 3 people accounted for, 1 alive and 2 of them dead. He needed to know if there were others who they could help. Perhaps they might not be too late in saving the 2 who were ahead of the 3 others. Mina's eyes widened at the sudden realization. She had been so preoccupied, almost being eaten, the 2 of them showing up suddenly and the death of Milius and Nick, that she had forgotten about the rest of her squad, Armin and Aaron. She exclaimed, they were ahead of us. Aaron's had his leg bitten off and Armin was close to him. Last time I saw him he was on the roof of one of the buildings. Right, that other guy and his buddy, Ed replied, quickly remembering. The 3 of them quickly got up, ran to the top end of the curved roof and began to scan the rooftops of the other buildings. Hey! Ed yelled, there's a blonde-haired guy sitting there, is that him? He pointed to one of the buildings in the opposite street. Mina turned the direction he was pointing, and it was Armin. Yeah, that's him, she replied. She reached down for the handles of her ODM and aimed them at the other roof. There was a weak click of the trigger which failed to be accompanied by the loud boom of a grappling hook being fired out of the barrel. Mina quickly realized that her gear didn't work after she collided with that brick pillar. Crap, I can't get to him if my gear isn't working, she thought. She then remembered Milius, his gear. She looked down at his body. Alphonse had placed Milius' hands together at the center of his body, and she walked up towards him and knelt down for a few seconds staring at the peaceful image of her deceased comrade. Milius. I'm sorry about this, but I promise I won't forget you, Nick and Thomas, Mina thought solemnly. She gently rolled his body to its side and began detaching his gear from his back. She placed it off to the side and carefully rolled him once more onto his back, placing his hands together on his chest, looking down at his peaceful form with a solemn expression. Both Ed and Al watched silently as she attached all the necessary components to her body. She then walked back towards the edge of the roof, aimed the handles at the rooftop where Armin sat and pulled the trigger. 2 long cables fired out of what looked to be 2 small barrels from the sides of her hips and latched onto the roof. She sighed in relief. I'll go to him, you guys stay here, said Mina, looking at the 2 of them. She then jumped off the ledge of the roof. the cables pulling her forwards as a stream of smoke poured out from a device on her lower back. She landed on the ledge of the other roof and walked towards Armin. She knelt down in front of him and placed her hands at his sides. He felt sticky for some reason. Armin. Armin, are you okay? She asked. Speak to me, Armin, where's Aaron? Armin continued to stare into nothingness with an empty look on his face, his eyes wide and his mouth agape. She then started to lightly shake him, hoping it would wake him from his daze. His eyes then turned towards her. Mina, he whispered. She let out a sigh of relief and tightly hugged Armin, not caring the gluey substance that coated his uniform. Am I dead? Before she could respond, she caught something out of the corner of her eye, splashes of blood. She quickly pulled back and checked if Armin was bleeding. He wasn't. It wasn't his blood. Oh God, she let go of Armin and slowly shuffled her way to the edge of the roof and peered down to the ground. Please God, no, please don't be dead. As her eyes scanned the floor, she caught sight of the upper half of an arm laying on a small pool of blood. She immediately moved back. Aaron, no. Sudden the sound of cables zipping from behind caught her attention. She turned to see Connie, Krista, and Amir along with other cadets landing on the ledge of the same rooftop as them, walking towards them. Mina, Armin, are you two okay? Connie asked with a concerned look on his face. Are you two hurt? Where's the rest of your squad? Where's Aaron? What the hell happened over there? He said, pointing at the mess of walls and spikes. The two of them were hit with a barrage of questions from Connie. Was that always there? Our squad. Armin turned to face Connie, then Mina, who sat beside side, and then it hit him. The memories of the horrible events that had transpired flooded back to him. He broke down and began to scream, "You useless dolt!" He cried, "Just die!" He started to cry heavily, his hands on his head as pulled at his hair. Both Mina and Connie were taken aback by what they saw. "Hey, calm down, Armin," said Connie. He then turned to Mina. "Where's the rest of the squad?" She turned her face away from Connie and stared at the ground, her face filled with anguish. There, she muttered as she felt throat dry up and a new flood of tears creeping to her eyes as the agony of losing another friend dawned on her once more. "They're dead," Connie interrupted Amir, who was standing on the top of the tiled roof, her back faced towards them. "Can't you tell? These two are the only survivors." "Shut up. If that's the case, then why are Armin and Mina here in one piece?" Connie retorted. "Who knows? Maybe they managed to escape while the rest got eaten, using their deaths as cover, though if Aaron's death prevented two of his squad members from sharing the same fate, then I guess you can say his death wasn't completely all for nothing." Amir responded. "It wasn't like that." Mina yelled angrily as she turned to face Amir, slamming her fist on the tiles. Almost instantly the anguish she was feeling was swept aside for anger at Amir's suggest. She never would have let her comrades die in her place, let alone use their deaths for such a cowardly advantage. Amir looked at her with a blank expression as Mina stared her down with gritted teeth and tears just on the edge of her eyes. "You bitch," growled Connie, seeing that her remark had painful struck both Armin and Mina. "Want me to shut you up for good?" "Stop it, you guys," pleaded Krista on the verge of tears, stepping in to separate Amir from Connie and Mina. "We've lost so many friends so quickly, we'll all just panicking, it's natural." Amir then roughly placed her arm around Krista and smiled. "That's my Krista," Amir said, almost laughing, leaning in forward near Krista's face. "When this is all over, why don't we get more dash?" Her attention was caught when she spotted individuals watching them. She pointed towards them. "Who the hell are those guys?" The group turned their attention towards them. Connie jumped from the rooftop and using his ODM gear propelled him to the rooftops of the opposite building where they were. Mina quickly followed suit. "Hey, you guys shouldn't be here. All civilians were meant to evacuate Trost. Why are you up here? The gate's probably closed by now. You're stuck in the middle of a battlefield," Connie exclaimed. The two watched for a few seconds as the guy continued going on a tangent about how this place wasn't safe. He was shorter than them, his hair was so short he might as well have been bald, and he had a round face with hazel-color eyes and an average build. Before the brothers could explain themselves, Connie caught sight of the cadet's body behind them and the dried blood on Alphonse's hands. He looked at them with wide eyes. Did you do that?" He then raised his blades at them. "Wait. You got the wrong idea," Alphonse said, trying to reason with him. Edward pushed Alphonse back slightly as he stepped forward to confront him. "Connie, yelled Mina, who just landed on the ledge, preventing a fight from breaking out. "These guys saved my life and they tried to save Mylia's too. They used some kind of power that allows them to make walls and pillars in seconds." She then pointed to the ground. "Look." Connie turned to the direction she was pointing to. He lowered his blades and looked in wide-eyed awe at the mess of walls, pillars, and spikes that littered the road. "I don't know how, but they make them by just putting their hands on the ground. They can't have." Connie muttered as he stared at the cluster of walls and spikes. "If they couldn't, then I'd be dead," responded Mina with a fierce resolve, fueled by the anger she felt when Amir accused Armin and her of cowardice. Amir and Krista also approached them and began to observe the brothers' handiwork. Connie then turned his head back towards them, his eyes still wide and his mouth slight agape. He was almost terrified to be in their presence. If what Mina was saying is true, then he wondered whether these guys were humans. "Just who the hell are you guys?" "I'm Edward Elric," he responded. He then placed his hand on the other blonde-haired guy's shoulders. "And this is my brother Alphonse Elric." The group of trainees examined the boys. They must have been about their age. The way they were dressed, you'd assume they were maybe the sons of one of those rich merchants and lived a comfortable life inside Walsina. Their leather black shoes and what they assumed looked to be finely crafted trousers and shirts was something you wouldn't see the average person in Walrose wearing. Both of them were about the same height with medium build and had golden eyes, but they identified Edward as the one with the ponytail and antenna stick out of his hair, had rounder face and was wearing a white button shirt, while his brother Alphonse was the guy with the shorter hair and broader face, had a plain orange jumper. "We're not from here," said Alphonse. "It's a bit of a long story." "So this is your handiwork, I'm assuming," said Amir, pointing at their mess. Ed and Al looked at her. She was maybe a little bit taller than they were, with a slender build, had slightly messy brown hair, freckles on her face and golden eyes like them. She was standing next to another girl, again slender build, but she was short, very short. She had big blue eyes and long blonde hair, and there was also something weirdly angelic about her. "Yeah," replied Edward, looking at the mess they caused. "It's basically an ability we have." "Hey, you guys!" came a voice behind from them. It was one of the other trainees. "We got the signal," the trainee informed them. "Looks like we're falling back," remarked Connie. He then scanned the rooftops. "Hey, where's Armin?" "He left. All he said was that he was heading to assist the rear guard," replied the trainee. "Hey, who are those guys?" Before either Ed or Al could reintroduce themselves, the sound of a loud bell rang through the air. "That's the signal to withdraw. No time to reintroduce yourselves," replied Connie. He then turned to the Elric brothers. After listening to them talk, he quickly figured that they seemed human, and if they saved Mina, then they had to be on their side. "You guys are gonna have to come with us." He walked towards the ledge. "Alright, one of you is gonna have to grab on from behind me." Edward grabbed hold of Connie. He wrapped one arm around the stomach and other above his chest. "Hold on tight," said Connie as he pushed off the ledge. "Ah!" Edward screamed. Alphonse watched as Edward zipped off on the back on Connie. He was then tapped on the shoulder by Mina. "We should get going," she said. "Oh, right," responded Al. He then looks down to the ground. "That's a high drop." He looked down at his dried blood-stained hands. He rubbed them together, getting most of blood off of him. He approached Mina, who was standing on the ledge, one foot ready to push off, and Al began to wrap his arms around her. Almost immediately he realized just how uncomfortably awkward it was as he wrapped one arm around her stomach, the other arm carefully above her chest, with his chest pressing against her back. He blushed profusely from the embarrassment he was feeling. "Sorry," he said apologetically. No, it's fine," replied Mina, stuttered, her own cheeks red with embarrassment. "Jeju's just hold on tight," and with she pushed her and Alphonse from the ledge. Chapter 4, The Will to Fight. Jean sat looking defeated, his body slumped over with his hand covering half of his face as he thought about the futility of it all. "We do nothing," he said. "They've rung the bell to signal the withdraw, finally. But we're out of gas and can't climb the wall." He paused for a second before finishing, letting the hopelessness and dread of the situation fully sink in. "We're all gonna die here. The supply squad had abandoned them and barricaded themselves in the HQ, those cowards, leaving out us here to dry, and we can't even replenish our gas stocks with the Titans swarming the HQ. The situation is fucked. We can't just stand around here. We have to fight tooth and nail against the tide as they come," declared Connie. "If we try and scurry away like a mouse, we'll waste what little gas we have, and once that happens we lose our mobility." He banged his fist on the gas tank to bring home his point. Before Jean could respond to Connie's call to lift the Titan siege on the HQ, a voice from behind them stopped him. "Hey, sorry if I'm interrupting." The both of them turned their heads to face him. It was Edward. Ed studied Jean's appearance. He looked to be maybe a few inches taller than him, had small brown eyes, spiky hair with an undercut and a long face. "I couldn't help but listen in on you guys, Connie and Jean, right?" he asked, pointing at Jean. He nodded his head. "How do you know my name?" Jean asked. "Mina, one of your comrades, told my brother Alphonse and I to come find you." Edward explained. "We're trying to come up with a plan to get out of here, said to find either you guys or a bunch of other people, Reiner, Sasha, or Marco I think, who could help." "You have a plan to get out of here?" Jean asked, perplexed by the confidence of this person in this moment. "Yeah, from my understanding your ODM gear is powered through gas, right? And you guys don't seem to have enough to make an escape, but maybe enough to head to that large building there." Edward pointed towards the HQ, which was crawling with Titans. "Yeah," replied Jean. "This is gonna depend on one other factor though," said Edward. He then scanned the length of road and turned his eyes towards the HQ again. "How far does this road go to the HQ?" he asked. "About halfways, then it cuts off into different roads and streets." "Why? You planning on using the roads? You do know we're on these rooftops to avoid Titans?" questioned Jean almost mockingly, as if someone suggested something so utterly foolish to him. "Wow, thanks for telling me, who would have known?" Edward replied with an annoyed look on his face and an equally sarcastic tone. "What I was about to suggest is that my brother and I could quickly make a wall on the road for you guys to run across. That way you use whatever gas you have for the other half of the stretch and hopefully still have enough to take out the Titans swarming the building." Jean looked at Edward puzzlingly. "You're telling me you and your brother can make a wall along this long stretch of road?" Connie enthusiastically turned back to Jean. "They can do it," his voice filled with fierce determination. "Mina said they saved her life using their abilities, and I've seen the aftermath of it, Jean. There were walls, pillars and spikes all over the place. There was even a large crossbow." Jean sat up and began to contemplate the idea. If what he says is true, then that could work. "Maybe," Jean muttered. "We have more than enough gas to get through there. This road is just a straight shot to the HQ." He stood up as the three of them huddled around. "Only problem I see is the Titans along the way. You'd need a group to clear a path for the others," Ed added. "If we could somehow rally everyone, then we'd have a good shot at it." Jean then looked around at the dozens of other trainees and garrison survivors around them. All of them seemed paralyzed with fear. No one was instilled with any kind of fighting spirit to take on a Titan, let alone groups of them. Jean's body once again fell into a slump with a hand holding his head. "It's probably the best option we got, but look around, we're all just terrified cadets. Most of us haven't seen a Titan before this battle, and on top of that the vast majority of the vanguard has been slaughtered, and I don't think any of us trainees could lead such a suicide mission," said Jean solemnly. "Why don't you do it?" asked Edward to Jean. "You seem to have a handle on the situation. I'm sure someone like you could lead them, or you, Connie. You've got a fighting spirit, or what about her?" he said, pointing towards Sasha, who was trying desperately to convince a bunch of other cadets to fight. Both of them were taken aback from the suggestion. "We're not cut out for leadership positions, Connie, and Sasha especially," said Jean. "Then, would it help if my brother Alphonse and I was the one leading the charge then?" Ed suggested. Both Connie and Jean fell silent as if contemplating the offer. Jean continued to look around at the other cadets and garrison survivors around. "I'm going to be honest, if you're offering a way out, then yeah, I can guarantee that a good chunk of cadets will follow you," he stated. "Problem is others won't follow you right away, and by the time they do, Titans will have come down on them and possibly us if we wait. So if this is gonna work, then a lot of them might die." Connie asked. Jean nodded, looking off to the side in slight disgust at the idea. "Look, I'm not leaving anyone here to get eaten. We've seen too much of that already," Ed argued resolutely. "If we're doing this, then we're doing this my way, and that means not one person getting left for dead, even if I have to drag some with us." For just a split second, Jean thought he heard his voice. He thought he was once again being lectured by Aaron with his suicidal noble ideas. Jean turned his head back to see only Ed looking at both him and Connie. "If I can't convince them, then you guys are going to have to lead them. I'll be there," Ed told them. "Find your other friends and tell everyone to get off their asses and get ready to move. if not then I'll do it, and trust me I won't be nice about it. Edward sat down next to Alphonse, who was sitting adjacent to Armin, with back against a watchtower wall, and Mina on his opposite side facing the brothers. Edward then looked over to Mina, who was trying to comfort a traumatized Armin, holding one of his hands with both of hers tightly as she looked at him with caring concern. Edward turned to look at Al and then Armin. Poor guy, he's seen his friends die in front of him, probably eaten right in front of him. No one should have to see something so messed up. Ed thought, what kind of bastard sends kids in to fight monsters? How did it go, brother? Asked Alphonse, turning his head to Edward. Ed let out a sigh and lowered his head. They like the plan. Problem is not everyone might follow, some of them looked to have just given up. Ed explained, I told them we're not leaving anyone behind, so they'll have to convince the others to join, though to be honest I don't know how successful they'll be. Ed then felt a twinge of guilt surface, thinking about the burden of responsibility he'd place on those two. If Aaron were here, he would have jumped at your idea and rallied everyone around it, said Mina remorsefully as she thought back to Aaron's speech during the night of graduation. She remembered the fire that was lit up from within her about humanity having a future in this world. How quickly things have changed. Edward, how do you and Alphonse intend to get to HQ without ODM gear? Do you need someone to carry you guys again? She asked, realizing a possible fatal flaw in the plan involving their own escape. Don't worry about us. By the look of these buildings we could probably jump our way there. You guys need to focus on getting to your base and taking out those titans. Mina nodded her head. Alphonse turned his head to Mina. Mina, I have to ask, about the titans. They're able to regenerate damaged body parts, but do they have a weak spot? Asked Alphonse, or is that in order to kill them you have to continually inflict damage on them? I ask because my brother and I have faced enemies with regenerative abilities, and the only way we defeated them was to continually damage them faster than they could regenerate. Al looked back on his first encounter with them and the shocks of watching them survive being impaled. He wonders if they were perhaps some lesser form of homunculi without the other abilities which made them formidable enemies. Their napes, it's their only known weakness. Inflicting a deep enough wound on their nape is fatal to them, replied Mina, followed by a question of her own. What do you mean you've faced enemies with those abilities? There are people who have Titan regenerative powers? Where are you guys from? As we said, we're not from here, said Edward. We don't even know what city this is or what's going on around here. All we know so far is that you guys are fighting these giant monsters which seem hell-bent on eating everyone they can get their hands on. I didn't even know why you guys had a huge wall around the city until we had an encounter with them. You're in Trost District. It's one of cities connected to Walrose, she answered, surprised by their ignorance of the situation. How do they not know that humanity has been at war against the Titans for over a century now, or the purpose of these walls? And who or what are these enemies who they fought with regenerative powers? How did they get those abilities? No human has even been caught doing such a thing, and how did they not know they were in the Trost District? The only way they could be this clueless about all this is if they then it hit her, and the realization sent a shiver down her spine. Are you guys from outside the walls? Asked Mina hesitantly, her eyes wide and focused in anticipation of their answer. Edward noticed that Armin's eyes had shifted towards him and his brother the moment those words left her mouth, breaking his traumatized state for a second, and he could have sworn that there were now others listening in on their conversation. It felt as if multiple pairs of eyes from an entire group of people were burning at the back of his head, waiting for him to answer and contemplating their move on how he'd answer. However, before he could open his mouth, the sound of footsteps from one of the other cadets running urgently towards them caught their attention. She was about the same height as Ed and Al, had short black hair and features similar to those in Seeing, and wore a blood-red scarf with her uniform. Armin! Yelled the cadet, who sprinted towards them. Mikasa, whispered Mina. With that, Armin lifted his head from Mina's shoulder and began to tense up with the feeling of dread and guilt consuming his entire being. There's no way I can look her in the eyes, he thought. What am I going to tell her? If I had known it would come to this, then I would have rather died with him. He thought back to when Aaron was being eaten by the Titan. Mikasa approached them and knelt in front of them. Unlike most people, she had completely ignored the brothers who were only just a foot away from her. Armin, are you okay? She asked, concerned. Is he okay? Is he injured? She asked Mina, but neither of them answered. Instead, Armin could only just stare blankly at the ground, and Mina just stared at the ground. An overwhelming feeling of guilt compelled her to look away. Where's Aaron? asked Mikasa, looking around. That was the question, the one question the two of them dreaded they had to answer. Armin lifted his head, revealing the tears that flowed down his face to Mikasa. Her eyes began to widen. She stood up, took a step backwards and blankly stared at the two of them. Trainee Squad 34, our squad, Tomasz Wagner, Nick Tees, Milius Zermuski and Eren Yeager, Armin said, almost choking on every word. They bravely fell in the line of duty. Mina closed her eyes tightly at Armin's words, her arm pressed against her eyes, soaking away the tears. Edward and Alphonse sat with their heads lowered out of respect for those two's fallen comrades. A part of them couldn't help but feel responsible for their deaths. Had they have not hesitated, had they have acted faster and saved them. I'm sorry, Mikasa, Eren had sacrificed himself for me and I couldn't do anything. People began to gather around them, listening on the emotional conversation. They muttered to themselves. They've been almost wiped out. Is this what happens when we face the Titans head on? Mikasa stood there in silence for a while as she stared off into the distance. Both Armin and Mina expected her to start yelling at them, telling them how it should have been them that died in Eren's place and how she hated them for not being able to save him. Armin lowered his head again, having said his piece. Mikasa gently placed her hand on Armin's arm. Armin, she said softly. Armin's head moved upwards to meet hers. A calm and stony expression greeted him. Calm down, this isn't the time or place to be emotional. She gently grabbed his hand and pulled him up. She turned her head toward Mina. Both of you stand up. She knelt down slightly and softly grabbed hers, lifting Mina up. Mikasa then turned around and proceeded to walk off. Marco, she called out, correct me if I'm wrong, but if we eliminate the Titans swarming the building, then everyone can replenish their gas supplies and climb the wall, correct? Her voice emanating with authority. Well, yeah, replied Marco. Both Edward and Alphonse looked at him. He was a fairly tall guy with short hair, a broad face, and similar to Emir, had freckles on his cheeks, but there's too many of them, you can't take them on. I can, she declared, raising her blade in the air. She never once raised her voice to shout, but she had the attention of every trainee. I'm strong, stronger than all of you, extremely strong. I can kill all the Titans there, even if I have to do it by myself, she declared with stony confidence. You're all either incompetent or just spineless cowards. How pathetic. She pointed her blade at them. You can all sit here and twiddle your thumbs and watch how it's done. Mikasa, that crazy? Pleaded one trainee. You want to fight all those Titans? Questioned another. That impossible, even for you, stated a third voice. You can't win. If I lose then I will die, she stated coldly, but if I win then I survive, but if I don't fight then I can't win. Her words lingered in the air and afterwards a sad silence settled in around everyone. She was about to leap off the ledge when the sound of slow claps breaking the silence stopped her. She turned around to see one of the blonde-hair individuals who sat near Armin and Mina clapping his hands at her with a smirk on his face. His hair was done up in a ponytail and he wore a white button shirt. You know, as far as motivational speeches go, yours is pretty good, got some hard truths in there, but you came off a little bit prideful with the I'm strong part, but the whole spineless cowards part, you really don't mince your words. I can respect that. He said with a smirk which annoyed her. And just who the hell are you? Mikasa asked, her grip tightening on the handles of her blade, beyond irritated by the smirk on his face. Edward Elric, he introduced himself. That guy over there is my brother Alphonse, and if you're planning on storming that castle over there. He pointed towards the HQ which was still swarming with Titans. My brother and I would be happy to help you. How exactly? Questioned Mikasa. He said that he and his brother can make a wall for us to run along which gets us halfway to HQ so that we wouldn't use as much gas. Said Connie, they can create things out of nothing. Mina said they saved her life doing it. Mikasa thought on Connie's words. It seemed impossible what he was saying. Nobody could do that, but if those two could then she'd take the opportunity. She'd need every edge she could get to eliminate the Titans swarming the HQ, and if there are people who can vouch for their abilities. Mikasa turned back to Edward. Is this true? Edward nodded as a response. Make the road. She ordered, in an authoritative tone. Edward and Alphonse ran towards the edge of the roof. Edward clapped his hands together and slammed them down. Suddenly a slope to the ground emerged from the side of the building. What the hell? Said one trainee. They just made a slope out of the wall. Yelled another. Ed and Al then slid down the slope to the ground. the two of them quickly slammed their hands on the ground in a tall thin wall about the same height as the buildings slowly rose up from the middle of the road. The sides of the road were receding into the wall, revealing the dirt underneath. "Titan!" yelled Sasha, coming down the road. "Get out of there!" Alphonse turned to face the Titan. He ran up to the bottom end of the tall transmuted wall and slammed his hand on the ground. Suddenly a large stone cannon appeared from the ground, fired straight at the Titan's neck and had blown apart everything from the shoulders up. The Titan's headless body collapsed onto the ground and began to dissolve in a cloud of smoke. "Ha!" yelled Alphonse, triumphantly. "Try surviving that." Suddenly more Titans began to walk up the same road. Al clenched his teeth and slammed his hands back on the ground again, this time transmuting 10-meter-long slanted pikes to hold them at bay and cover the cadets' retreat. The trainees could only watch, stunned by what they witnessed, walls, spikes and even cannons erupting from the ground by just clapping their hands. "They can't be human," said of the trainees. "They must be from the heavens," whispered another. Once the wall was finished, Edward transmuted a staircase on its side. Both he and Alphonse urgently climbed upwards to the top. Ed then yelled at the group of cadets, "Hey! Get a move on!" Mikasa leaped from the ledge, landed gracefully on the wall and sprinted towards the HQ. She was then followed by Edward and then Alphonse, who turned back to face Mina and Armin and signaled them to follow. Both of them ran toward the ledge and leaped onto the wall to follow Mikasa and the Elrics. Jean muttered to himself as he watched the small group run along the wall headlong into battle. "Ed must be deaf because your oratory skills are terrible." Were those harsh words meant to call us into action? He paused for a second. "Eren, this is entirely your fault." "Hey!" he yelled from the top of his lungs. "I don't know about you, I wasn't taught to let my comrades fight alone. Get a move on. Or are we really the spineless cowards they think we are?" He quickly leaped onto the wall and started running, followed closely by Connie and Marco. "Hey you weaklings, cowards, idiots!" yelled Sasha at the other trainees before jumping onto the wall herself. "Oh what the hell?" said another trainee as he unsheathed his blade. It happened suddenly, a call, a rallying cry to action, and soon the paralyzed cadets found their will to fight and charged, leaping onto the wall to lift the siege of the HQ from the Titans. Chapter 5, Charge. Edward looked back to see a long line of trainees run along the wall. "Looks like they found the will to fight after all," he thought to himself. He felt a strange mixture of admiration for their will to move forward and a slight pang of guilt over whether he was too hard on them. That feeling quickly gave way to shock as he saw more Titans heading for them. "They're coming for us!" screamed one of the trainees. "Just keep running, we'll evade them at the halfway point," ordered Jean. "They must gather around places with a high concentration of people," thought Alphonse as he watched the incoming horde approach them. "I've got to hold them off, so that the others can escape." Alphonse clapped his palms together, but before he could use his alchemy to transmute a way down, Mikasa leapt from the wall. A burst of gas from the exhaust pushed her into the air. She swung around an incoming Titan and carved out a large cut into its nape. "Mikasa!" cried Armin. He fired the cables from his ODM gear in pursuit of her. He was followed by Mina going in to support her only surviving squad member. Alphonse slowed down his running to watch the three of them glide away. He wanted to go after them, but Ed moved him along, grabbing his collar and pulling him forward. "Keep moving, Al, they'll be fine." Edward turned his head towards the direction of Mikasa, who had cut down another approaching Titan, all while being followed by Armin and Mina. "Looks like she can handle them," said Ed, reassuring Alphonse. "Jean!" yelled Connie as he fired the cables from his ODM gear. "I'm going after them, lead the others." Jean looked back at Connie, who leapt off the ledge in pursuit of the others. He tightly closed his eyes in frustration. "Damn it, Connie, why is it me leading them?" "All right people. We're close to the halfway point. Prepare to switch to ODM gear on my order. We'll have enough gas to make it to the HQ, but not enough to completely take out the Titans around the buildings." Jean thought, "We'll just have to take out as many as we can and quickly retreat inside." He then looked to the Elric brothers, who were running some distances in front of them. "We're close to the edge. How are they going to get to HQ with ODM gear?" "Hey!" yelled Jean. "How are you guys getting to the HQ?" Edward turned back to look at Jean. "Don't worry about us," he responded. "Worry about getting yourselves there and taking out those Titans." He turned his head towards Alphonse. "L. We're close to the halfway point. I'm gonna transmute a ledge, get ready to jump to building on the left. we can use the rooftops to get to the fortress," yelled Edward. "Ready when you are," responded Alphonse, running behind Ed. While they ran forward, Edward clapped his hands together and skidded his left hand on the side of the wall, transmuting a small ledge for them to jump off. "We're at the end, jump!" yelled Edward. The brothers jumped from ledge on the wall to the rooftops of the buildings. From there they began to leap from rooftop to rooftop toward the HQ. "This is it. Prepare switch to ODM gear," ordered Jean to the other trainees. He leapt from the edge of the wall and fired the cables of his ODM gear. He has propelled himself toward. He turned his head to the left to see the Elric brothers rooftop hopping their way forward. He was amazed at how fast they were and how graceful they were in their jumps and landings. "They're done this before," Jean thought to himself. As they jumped from roof to roof, Edward couldn't help but be reminded of the time he and his brother were in North City looking for Scar and Mai. Though unlike North City, this city wasn't too damn big for them to navigate through, though they were gonna need to be fast if they wanted to evade the Titans along the way. It all happened so suddenly. She was ready to fight the large Titan with nothing but her blunt and shortened blade when the Titan behind ignores her and instead strikes its own with a killer blow to its face. The sheer force of its punch had placed immense pressure on its footing that it cracked the ground underneath it, sending small bits of the ground into the air and Mikasa off her feet. She watched as the Titan which approached her was sent flying down the street. She looked up at the other Titan, observing its muscular features, its oily hair and sunken in green eyes. Mikasa watched on stunned as the Titan furiously tore apart its own kind and let out a vicious roar when it had finished. She was suddenly grabbed from behind by someone and swung upward onto the roof of a nearby building. She turned around to see Armin's face. He was accompanied by Mina and Connie. "Mikasa, are you alright?" asked a concerned Mina. "We saw you hit the roof and fall." "I'm fine," replied Mikasa in a monotone voice. "Good, now come on you guys, we gotta get the hell out of here," Connie yelled. His eyes caught sight of the two tall Titans just meters away from them. "There's two 15-meter class Titans." The four of them turned their attention towards the two Titans. "Wait," said Mikasa, "that Titan, it's not going after us." They watched as the two Titans stared down each other, after a very brief period of silence before both Titans let out blood-curdling roars. The group watched in stunned silence as the muscular Titan raised its hands in a fighting position and swung its left fist to deliver a devastating blow to the cheek, sending the head of the other Titan flying towards them and into the nearby church tower. It then crushed the neck of the headless Titan to finish off its kill. It knew to go for the weak point. Observed Armin, "It's not reacting to us at all. If this were any other Titan it would have gone after us already. This isn't a mindless Titan. It knew the weak spots of its kind and purposefully went for it, and the way it raised its fists, it knows how to fight hand to hand. This kind has never been recorded before, a Titan with intelligence," added Mina, watching the Titan with a feeling of great unease. "It's an abnormal then," said Connie. "It doesn't matter now, we still have to get out of here." "Wait!" yelled Armin, Mikasa out of gas. Connie turned around to face Mikasa. "Are you kidding me? We can't take out the Titans around the HQ without you," panicked Connie. "Mikasa, take my gas," said Armin as he removed his gas canister from his ODM gear. "I haven't got a lot, but it's the best chance you have." He then began to replace Mikasa's empty canister with his. "There's no point in me having it, but please use it carefully." Mikasa stared blankly at Armin. "I moved forward, not knowing the responsibility I had in leading those who had followed me. I gave up on my own life without realizing I was responsible for their lives too. Thought Mikasa." "Armin, don't do this, you're the only family I have left." "Armin, don't do this," said Mina. She then took one of her own canisters from her gear. "I've got more than what you have in your. Take one of mine," she said as she began to remove one of her canisters to give to Mikasa. "No, Mina," said Armin, turning to her. He had a look of mild anger on his face. "It has to be me doing this. Mikasa, you and Connie need to get out of here and back to the HQ without me. I'll only hold you guys back." Mina looked at Armin, stunned by his answer. "There," Armin said as he tested out Mikasa's gear. "It's all working and I've replaced your blades with mine. I know you'll put them to better use." He then held up the short-used blade that was in Mikasa's handle, staring at his own reflection. "Just leave this one with me. If it comes to it, I'd rather not be eaten alive by them." The three of them looked at Armin astonished of what he was saying. "It's my fault Eren is dead, it should be him standing here, not me." Mikasa took the blade from his hands and threw it off the ledge. Armin watched numbly as Mikasa took the blade from him, but she knelt down beside him. Armin, she grabbed his wrist. I'm not abandoning you here, she pulled him up. Armin, he turned to face an outraged Mina. Eren gave his life for yours, don't make his sacrifice be for nothing, she proclaimed as she held back tears once more. Armin lowered his head and clenched his fist. He shut his eyes tightly to hold back his own tears. You're right, I'm so sorry. It doesn't matter now, all that matters now is getting back to HQ, added Mikasa. Bulletin. But you can't go jumping around while carrying someone, not when there's titans crawling around the area. We're not leaving you, Armin, Mina said as she grabbed his arm. Mikasa and Connie, you two were top of the class, so it only makes sense for you guys cover us. Right, responded Connie. Armin could only watch as the four of them rushed toward the ledge to escape. He turned to look once more at the abnormal titan which attacked its own. His eyes widened as he formulated an insane plan. Listen, he shouted. The others turned to face him. I have an idea, but it'll take you guys to do it, so you'll have to decide. He paused for a few seconds. It's a crazy plan, but the trainees began their approach to the HQ. Thanks to that wall, it looked as though no one was going to run out of gas before they reached the base. However, they didn't have enough gas to engage in a drawn-out battle against the Titans. Jean assessed the area. The Titans had the HQ and surrounding area swarmed. They'd need to take out some of the Titans to get into the building. We need to be fast, Jean thought. We'll each have to pick out targets and quickly escape into the building. All right, people. No drawn-out battle, he ordered, yelling at the top of his lungs. Pick a Titan, kill it and escape into HQ. He spotted a Titan in front of the building, a class 15-meter Titan. That one, he thought. Picking his target, I'll take out that one and hopefully break through one of the windows of the H. His thoughts were interrupted as one of the trainees to his right was suddenly snatched by a Titan. His wails of terror pierced through the air. Jean turned his head to see the trainee caught in the grasp of one of the Titans. Damn it. He was getting closer to his target and the HQ. He readied his blades and swung, cutting deep into the 15-meter class Titan's neck. Got it, he thought triumphantly as he crashed into one of the windows of the HQ. Jean tumbled onto the floor of the HQ. As he got up from the floor, other trainees began to crash through the windows, along with more trainees following through the now broken windows. Jean examined the trainees who had burst through the window. Most of them had evaporating blood on their blades. Have we done it? Jean thought. A smile of relief appeared on his face. Have we freed the HQ from the Titans? He turned to face the window. His face dropped as he saw a large group of Titans still surrounding the building and the other unlucky trainees who were caught by Titans being eaten only meters away from their salvation. Jean's body slumped as he placed his head in his hand. How many people could have made it if I just told them to retreat, not fight? His thoughts were interrupted by a sound from under one of the desks in the room. He turned his head to see two trainees cowering underneath it. Hey, you guys were part of the support squad? Asked Jean dazedly. They nodded their heads in response. Quickly Jean leaned down and picked one of them up from the desk by the collar and threw a hard blow to the cowering trainee's temple. He was quickly restrained by Marco, who held him back. You cowards, you left us on our own. People are dead because of you, he viciously shouted at them. Suddenly that sound of more glass shattering caught the attention of everyone in the room. Marco let go of Jean. They looked to see who it was. At first they expected it to be more trainees from breaking though, but the gold hair and eyes were unmistakable. It was the Elric brothers. They both tumbled across the floor and slowly sat up. They gasped for air, trying to catch their breath after their long run through the Titan-infested stretch of city. It's a good thing those things are slow, thought Ed, otherwise we couldn't have made it. Ed sluggishly picked him and Alphonse from the floor. Al rested his arm on Edward. They smiled at each other through their labored breathing. Everyone else in the room stared at them with wide-eyed awe. Hey, aren't those the Elric brothers? Whispered one trainee. They actually made it, whispered another. These guys must be fast, whispered a third. How the hell D-dash, but before Jean could finish his sentence, the sound of what could only be described as incoming cannon fire closing in on the building was heard. Take cover, yelled a trainee. A powerful crash on the left of the room had sent everyone ducking for cover as bits of wall was thrown across the room. The force of the crash had pushed Jean and others onto the ground. Jean picked himself up and faced the now large gaping hole in the wall. His eyes met with the large unblinking eyes of two Titans. Almost everyone in the room began to panic and head for the door out of the room and deeper into the building. "There's too many of us in the room," yelled a trainee. "They're gonna get in," cried another. "Where's Mikasa?" shouted one of the trainees in the panic. "Forget her, she and the guys who went after her are dead," responded another. Edward and Alphonse clapped their hands together, preparing to fight the Titans once more, or at least hold them long enough for the trainees to escape. In the exhausted state they were in, they couldn't possibly hope to clear out the Titans who were trying to claw their way in. For Jean, everything just seemed to slow down, the trainees running out of the room and the Elric brothers clapping their hands together. He could only stand and stare at the large emotionless faces staring back at him. He was paralyzed with fear, lost in their hungry eyes. "I guess it's time to face reality. Was I really so foolish as to believe? No, I guess on some deeper level I had known all along. There's no winning. Not against them." That's when he noticed it, a fist. A large Titan-sized fist suddenly being pressed into the cheek to the Titan on the right, its cheek producing ripples as the fist impacted. Wadash! Boom! The two Titans who were peering in through the large hole were sent flying to their left. That's when another Titan came into view. Those who were left in the room observed the Titan, its oily black hair, its sharp jagged teeth, its incredible muscular form and its radiant green eyes. It let out a deafening roar at the other Titans and stormed onwards to finish them off. Everyone who was left in the room watched, stunned by what they were witnessing, a Titan attack other Titans. Suddenly the sound of glass shattering caught the attention of everyone in the room. It was Mikasa, followed by Connie and Mina, who was carrying Armin. "Mikasa," said Jean, surprised at her survival. "Man, we just made it," exclaimed Connie. "We were pretty much running on fumes, but we made it." He placed his blades back into the metal containers, while he was told to cover Armin and Mina. Mikasa had been the one to clear a path for them, and shifting the focus of the abnormal on the HQ, Connie turned to face Armin, who was hopping off of Mina's back. He roughly placed his arm around Armin. "You're a damn genius," praised Connie. "Your crazy plan worked." Jean watched them, stunned by their survival. He had thought they were dead, deviating from the path and into the Titan hordes. "You guys, you made it." They all turned to face Jean and the other trainees who were staring at them, and noticed that they weren't the only ones who made it. The Elric brothers were here too. "Alphonse, Edward." Mina called out, "You guys made it." She was surprised and greatly relieved. The two who saved her were still alive and managed to get to HQ. "Damn. You guys made it too," said Connie, pleasantly surprised by their survival. "Guess that explains the pillars on those buildings." "Mina, it's great to see you again," responded Alphonse. "I'm glad you made it." He smiled, relieved to see that the only person he was able to save was still alive. "We can talk about his great to see each other another time," interjected Edward. "But what about that Titan over there?" He pointed towards the abnormal Titan. "Oh, that Titan got some kind of bone to pick with its own kind," proclaimed Connie, pointing at the abnormal. "And the best part? It couldn't care less about us. He's our ticket out of here." Jean was astounded by what he was hearing. "Listen to yourselves, we can't rely on a Titan, it will never work." "It is working," retorted Mikasa in her usually authoritative tone. "Whatever it is, if we allow it to continue its little rampage, if it can keep the Titans occupied, this will give us a chance to escape. This is our best plan for survival." Check the description for the links to the author.